So assuming that we're dealing with um, that our routes and our backend is going to be working, there really are only two files that we should end up having to deal with at this point. So what I'm going to do here is that jQuery is defined as a global variable after bringing in jQuery. And I'm actually going to be able to specify there's a sort of shortcut methods that wrap around that $Ajax. So internally, this is going to be calling that $Ajax with a GET request, but it just makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to call API days. And one of the things you could also do here is that this does actually implement a promise. You don't have to use it with a promise. You could use it with a callback, but it does end up returning a promise. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call this after we get that back. So one thing we can do is we could console.log and see what the days look like. Go back to our web page. Let's open up our tools over here. And let's load this up. Let's clear this out. And so let's reload this guy up. That's not what I want. That's my API for my days. But you could actually see I have a day that's there. And in fact, if I went back to my home page, I should see that I do have one day that's there. And what I'm going to do here is that instead of actually passing in this empty array, I'm going to end up passing in my days. The other thing is that we're passing in these attractions here. These were actually just a global variable. So I sort of lied. There is one more file we're going to have to take a look at, but that should really be the only one. So I have this on this index page. I have these variables here, and I'm just going to comment that out because I'm not going to end up needing them. So here's my app folder here. There is one other thing that I did want to do, and we could actually probably even write a test for it. But just to make my life a little bit easier when I'm looking at an item, and you saw that I ended up doing that manually on that other page, which is to basically put a category on my item so I knew what category it was in. One thing I'm going to also do here in the database, so I am going to go back to my model for a sec. And so what I'm going to do is that for each of my restaurants and hotels, I am going to put a category on here. So I'm going to have a category, and this is going to be a type of a string. And I'm going to give it a default value. I don't really plan on setting these, but my default value is going to be hotels. So to just make it a little bit easier from ever grabbing these things, which I ended up doing before when I had this on the front end, I could just look at this object and figure out exactly what it is. So this is going to be restaurants. And again, these are matching up to what my categories are on the front end. And this one is going to be a activities. And just to see that we didn't end up breaking anything, let's just run our tests again. So those all passed, that's good. And we could also have tested this out fairly easily. So what I'm going to end up doing here, so at this point, I'm passing in my days to the trip planner. So let's actually go in and take a look at the trip planner itself. So if we end up looking at the trip planner, and this is really where most of our work is going to end up being here, but if we end up looking at our trip planner, we're going to make quite a few modifications to it. So I'm relying a lot on my trip planner. This was a sort of dried out a little bit from what we ended up doing in class, but there's, um, I end up basically having this category iterator, which iterates over categories. And here's an example of actually using bind because, again, when we end up going in here, if we just ended up calling this function, our context would change, and I want my context to stay this object that I'm looking at. So let's actually see what happens here when we end up loading this. Now, we should have an empty day, so I don't expect anything to break. So that looks pretty good, but let's actually set up this functionality where how we're going to be actually go in and add items to a day and remove items from the day and so on and so forth. We could actually even start at right now if we went in here and we added a day, that would be fine, but it's not really adding a day, right? It's just keeping that one day that we have. So let's actually start out with that functionality. If we look at our day adder here, we've got this add day function. And what we're going to do, instead of having that, setting up that add day function, what we can end up doing is when we go to add a day, we could actually do a $.post. There's no data that you have to pass when you're adding a day, right? It just ends up creating a new day. So we could end up posting this, and again, we could take advantage of the fact that we end up getting a promise back. And what we're going to do here is that this is going to give us a day. So what we could end up doing client side is we could say, hey, look, you have a collection of days. Let's take the days. Let's push in this day. And I'm also going to set this day as my current day by specifying that my current IDX is going to be that.days.length minus 1. I don't really need the ID. I could just basically move on to the next index. And at this point, I can render my day picker. And let's get rid of this here. And so now, if we go and test this, this would be a lot trickier to test. Actually, you actually have to load up a headless browser to test this. That's always adds a level of complexity here. So now if I end up going to add a day, it should add the day. And if I go and I end up reloading this page, I should see that my day ended up getting added. If I went back here and I ended up looking in my database itself, and make this a lot bigger and clear this out, I should be able to say db.days.find, and I should end up seeing these 2 days with these 2 different indexes. So if we can add a day, surely we can remove a day. So let's actually put some logic in here so that we can actually remove the last day just to make our life a little bit easier. And so what I'll do here is I'll specify, hey, look, if you go in here and your days.length is equal to 1, so you're on your last day, let's just do a return with an alert. An alert is kind of silly here. We could always change the UI later on, just to have some indication what's failing. You cannot remove day 1. Okay? Otherwise, so now what we want to do, and there's no shortcut as far as I know to do a delete, so here we're actually going to have to use Ajax, the Ajax method, and we're going to specify that the method is going to be delete. And we'll specify that the URL is going to be /API days. And we could actually get our We don't have a method. In this one, I don't think I have a method for my current day. So let's actually set that up. I think I just did not add it to this one. So we'll specify prototype, and we'll say current day. The current day is just going to look at the day with the current index, right? So we'll return this dot days, this dot current IDX. And so when we end up getting in here, we could specify that when we want to delete a day, we're going to end up looking at the current day. And again, we're sitting in here inside an event handler for this click, so we have to use that, and we'll say current day ID. So that'll give us the current ID, and we'll put a success handler here. And what we're going to end up doing with our success handler is that, assuming that we're successful here, we'll do pretty much the same thing that we did before, which is to say, hey, that dot days, and we'll splice that current IDX, and we'll just take one of them. And at this point, we could say that dot render date picker. So that should give us the ability to render our date picker. The other thing that we want to do here, this was how we had set things up before, is that actually we'll go and set the current IDX back to 0. So here's our success function. Here's our Ajax. So let's test that out. So we should have 2 days here. I should be able to go and remove a day, add days, and remove. Okay. Here I get that error that I can't remove day 1, which is fine too. So the next thing that we're going to look at is actually how to add and remove the attraction. So we'll start by adding the attractions. And we've got some logic here. Some of this I had put in before. If there was no length on the days, I wouldn't let you add anything. I don't expect that to be the case, because I can't really delete the last day anyway. But what we're going to do here is that we're going to, we know that the call that we need to make, this is the ID that we're going to be sending in, this value. And so let's comment this out for a moment. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say we're going to post. And what are we going to post to? API days. And this is going to be, again, we're inside of a button click. This is going to be that dot current day. And this is going to be the ID. And we're also going to have to specify what the category is, right? So it knows what collection to deal with. This way we just need to have the 1 route as opposed to 3 routes. And this is going to be selector.val. So we're going to post to this. This is going to give us a day back. So we're going to end up getting this day back. And what I really want to do, it's one thing I could do is I could update the entire day, but it's a little bit more efficient, and there's going to be a little bit of a better user experience here if, in fact, I just basically add the new item that I want to add here. So what I want to do is from this day, I want to specify, hey, look, where is my item? And the way that I'm going to end up getting my item is I'm going to say, hey, look, day.category, and I'm going to filter from that. So this is basically going to loop over all of the items in that category. So if I just added a hotel, it would end up, giving me I would have it at this point. I'm going to be filtering over that collection of hotels. So here's my item, and I'm going to specify in terms of what I'm looking for. I'm going to say, hey, look, if the item's ID is equal to what my selector was. My selector's value. So again, I'm getting the entire day back, and I want to pull out from that day this item. So if it's equal to this, I'm going to return, and I only want, filter gives me an array, I want just the first one. That's all I really expect to get. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to update my day, and I'm going to say my days and my current index is now going to be this new day. And I'm also going to need to add this day to the DOM itself. So again, I could get away without doing this, but the problem is that if I ended up going and switching days after that, it wouldn't realize that, but that day had actually gotten updated. So I'm going to have this method, which exists already, called render item, and I'm going to pass in this item. So let's look at this render item method. So here's the render item method. And what this ends up doing is that it gets the appropriate list. It ends up adding the item. I have the ID. I have the category. Again, I've added that category so that the item should have the correct category. It's got the right name. And these are some things that I added here where I want to hide. If I selected it, I want to keep it so that I can't select it twice. So I have this logic that ends up hiding the item in the chooser based on the item. And again, it looks at the item's category to find the right chooser, uses the ID, and ends up setting a class so that item is hidden. So let's take a look, and let's make sure that that works. And we'll also put in some logic to make sure that we are not able to add more than one hotel as well. So let's look at this. Here's our first day. So if I end up adding a restaurant, that restaurant ends up showing up. I could add another day. And if I come back here, let's figure out what that error is. Cannot read property restaurants of undefined. So let's take a look at that. Yes, I should have realized this, that so before we were just adding an ID, and as a result of that, we actually had to go and whenever we were rendering a day, our day had a category that had a collection of IDs, and we were looping over the IDs. And again, it was like we were storing a database on the page. We had all those collections that were on the page. So the reason why this is failing is that I'm calling this find items by ID and category. And this was actually looking at that attractions variable that we had passed in here. So that's actually a method we're not going to need. So find by ID and category. We're going to actually take that out. If I could just find it. It's find item. Okay, so this is the one that we're going to end up getting rid of. But what we'll do here, instead of taking it out right away, what we should realize here is that when we end up getting a day, so here again, so just sort of breaking this down, this is our current day, right? We could actually even use our current day variable here, and we're looping over our iterator, which is going to be our 3 categories. So this is going to give us actual items. So in this case, we could say items for each. We don't need this. This is going to be the item itself. And again, we've added the category to this item in the database. So now if we actually test this out, we should be able to reload this page. And we should be able to add additional restaurants, switch from day to day, add another restaurant here. Let's actually do one other thing here, which is that we want to be able to add a hotel, but we don't want to be able to add more than one hotel. So let's put a little bit of logic here that specifies that if there is in fact a hotel, let's make the user remove the hotel. So again, this is, and again, you can see how these things could spiral out of control pretty fast. This add day we're not going to need because we're never going to get to a point where we're going to have a length of 0. We're going to prevent that from happening. We also are not going to need our attractions either. We took that out. So let's clean this up a little bit. And so if we go down here, let's actually do a little bit of logic here. So here's where we're adding our attraction. Let's just put another bit of logic here that says if category is equal to hotels and that current day hotels dot length is equal to 1, meaning you've already got a hotel in there. Let's just do another alert, return alert. You already have a hotel. All right, so we'll make the user end up removing that. So we're not enforcing that logic of just having one hotel on the database end, although we could do that with a hook. And eventually we could actually go in and modify that, so that would be a singular property for hotel. But for now, this is good. Again, we sort of want to minimize what we end up having to change on the front end at this point. But let's test that out. So what should happen here, we should be able to add a hotel. But if we go to add another hotel, right, we get this message that we already have one. Of course, we could end up adding it on another day. And we also see that logic where when we end up, we actually have to implement removing the hotel. That'll sort of be the last piece of this that we have to do. So let's take a look and see how we're going to end up implementing that. So this is on this case, we've got our day list. So I set up some iterators here. This is a day list iterator. Again, all it's doing is giving us the ability to iterate over all of our sort of destination lists. And I mean, you can look at the code for that. Again, my whole thought was to just basically not have a lot of places where I had the different categories, so that if I decided to add another category, it would be pretty easy to do that. So in this one, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to set up the logic to determine how we end up removing a day. So we just sort of think about this. What's going to happen is that we know we can hit the database and remove a day. And again, what I'm trying to avoid is re-rendering the entire day. What I would like to do is to say, hey, look, you ended up deleting this from your day. Here's your, again, both the post method and the delete method return the actual updated day. So I could reset the current day, but the only thing that I really have to do is really remove the item from the day. So let's actually set that up. Make that kind of maybe a little bit more interesting here. So this is going to be up on our on this day list iterator. And so the way that I'm going to, the method that we're going to eventually have to call here is going to be, again, this doesn't exist anymore. We can't find an item by ID and category. That only worked when we had all that stuff, on the page. But what I'm going to want to do here is make an AJAX request. And this is going to be a method of delete. And what I'm going to want to do here is that my URL, and my URL is going to be API days. I'm going to need to know my day, so I'll say, again, I'm in my handler here. This is going to be that dot current day ID. I have a category, which is good. And I also have an ID. So that's going to give me the URL that I want here. And again, when this is successful, I'm going to have my day, which should be a day without that particular attraction. And let me comment this out here. And so what I'm going to do here when this is successful is that, first of all, I want to know which, the method that I have, remove item from day, is actually going to be looking for an item. Now, that item is going to be gone by the time I end up getting back here. But what I could do is I could actually grab this item. This is going to be the item that's going to be deleted. It's going to be the item that I need to remove from the list. And I also have to, activate it in the chooser, so it could be chosen again. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that current day. So here's my current day. Here's my category. And I'm going to filter it. And so this is going to be an item that I'm going to be filtering. And I'm going to get the first element. And this is going to be where the item's ID is equal to the ID that I'm looking at when that item ends up getting clicked on. So this is the item that has been removed from the DOM. And one thing we could also do here is we could go over here and maybe just return from this and just see that we ended up getting our item. We just see that we don't have any other errors here. So again, this is going to be the functionality of removing something. So if we click on this, we should find the correct item. But again, we're going to want to make this call to remove it. So here's our URL where we're doing a delete. And when we get back here, what we're going to want to do is we're going to, again, want to update our day. So we want to specify that, hey, that days, that current IDX equals day. And we have this method that remove item from day. I'm just going to make one modification here. So I'm going to actually pass into this the element that I want to remove plus the item, right? I don't have to go and find the element because I actually clicked on the element. So when I get in here, again, I've got this problem where my this is going to be pointing to something else. So that's going to be my element. That's what's going to end up getting removed. So actually, instead of removing it here, I'm going to do something a little bit different where when I remove item from the day, also clean this up a little bit. So we've got this remove item from day. And again, this is going to totally deal with the DOM. So at this point, I've got my item. I'm going to actually pass in an element. And just to make it look a little bit nicer here. So this is the remove item from day method. What I'm going to do here is that I'm going to specify, so this is just a plain old HTML element, but I'm going to do casting, and I'm going to specify, hey, look, I want to hide you, and I want to hide you slowly. All right, so we'll sort of see it disappear. And then, so this falls under the category of animation with jQuery. So basically, if something is happening over a time period, when it's done, this callback function will end up getting called, in which case this actually operates on the element itself. So again, if the DOM implements remove, I could actually do that and then wipe it out from the DOM. I could probably also even just, I have the element, I could tell the element to remove as well. That would work just as good. In this case, I want these two other things to happen where I want to make this available again so I could add it again, and I want to remove the marker. So again, this really gets a bit, and again, I don't have to remove it from my collection of my days because I've got my updated day back already, and that's already been updated. So this is sort of strictly moving with all these things are pretty much just dealing with the DOM, and that could help because then, maybe if we did want to separate out that logic, we could do it. But again, the tricky part here is that, if we wanted to just get the updated day and just re-render the day, we could do it, and that would work pretty easily. But that would go through the process of wiping out our list, wiping out our markers. Here, we're able to sort of get that functionality that we had before, where we're sort of kind of really pinpointing with precision the part of the DOM that we want to insert into, the part of the DOM we want to remove from. And again, we've got this sort of play here where when something gets added from here, you can't add it again. When something gets removed, it ends up showing up on here, and that's not something that we ended up doing in class. But again, it's just an additional function that ends up getting written. So let's actually test this out. We could remove a hotel. And here, I'm seeing that I have a context issue. This not uncommon to get. So this is when we remove the item from the day. My this, and again, this is just the way that jQuery is written. When you end up hiding something, the this points back to the thing that you ended up hiding. So when we go in here, we'll say that equals this. Let's move this back here. And so we'll say that show item in chooser, that mapper remove marker item. And all that logic should pretty much be the same. So I could add a hotel. When I add it, it disappears from here. When I remove it, it'll end up showing back up in here. I can only add one hotel at a time. I could switch days and switch back, add a day, and everything is persisted. So that pretty much wraps this up. Again, you can see it's not really trivial at all. I mean, I think the most trivial part of this is actually doing the server-side stuff. The client-side stuff is pretty tricky, especially here where we are really going in and just modifying, whatever needs to be modified. You could actually, sort of think about that here. If we end up going and adding multiple activities, right? It's not like we're re-rendering the day here. We're just adding the activity to the list here. And that pretty much wraps this up. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start looking at Angular. And again, it's a sort of a good transition because one of the things you'll realize when you do this is that you really have a need for some sort of framework that sort of is going to help. You can imagine writing a big single-page application, just with jQuery, where, again, we could go in and we could restructure this a little bit so it's a little bit cleaner, but there's going to be a lot of responsibility on our end to do that. And again, these front-end frameworks, like whether they be Backbone, whether they are Ember, whether they're Angular, whether they're React, these are taking care of a lot of this logic for us.